February 19, 1945. Dawn breaks over a small volcanic island in the Pacific, 8 square miles of black sand and sulfur. Mount Suribachi looms over the southern beaches like a dark sentinel, its 550-foot peak shrouded in morning mist. The air reeks of sulfur. Steam vents hiss from cracks in the earth. This is Iwo Jima, and beneath its barren surface, 22,000 Japanese soldiers wait in 11 miles of tunnels, ready to transform this hellish rock into the bloodiest battlefield the United States Marine Corps will ever know. In the waters offshore, the largest armada ever assembled for a Pacific invasion churns toward the beaches. Over 450 warships, nearly 70,000 Marines. They're about to storm an island smaller than Manhattan, and in the next 36 days, almost 7,000 of them will die here. Another 20,000 will be wounded. More Marines will fall on Iwo Jima than in all of World War I combined. Why this island? Why send so many men to die for 8 square miles of volcanic ash and rock? The answer lies 660 miles north, in the skies over Tokyo. Every day, massive B-29 Superfortress bombers take off from airfields in the Mariana Islands, flying 7-hour missions to bomb the Japanese mainland. But Iwo Jima sits directly in their path, a Japanese radar station that warns of every incoming raid, giving the enemy precious minutes to scramble fighters and prepare defenses. Japanese interceptors based on Iwo harass the bombers, shooting them down or forcing them off course. Worse, when B-29s are damaged over Japan, they have nowhere to go. Flying back to the Marianas with failing engines means ditching in the ocean, where most crews drown or disappear. Capture Iwo Jima, American planners argue, and you eliminate the radar. You provide a fighter escort base for the bombers, and you create an emergency landing field that could save thousands of airmen. The Marines don't know about the tunnels yet. They don't know that the Japanese commander has abandoned every traditional defensive doctrine. They don't know they're walking into a death trap engineered by one of the most brilliant military minds of the war. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi arrived on Iwo Jima in June 1944 with orders from Prime Minister Hideki Tojo himself, personally selected by Emperor Hirohito. Unlike most Japanese generals, Kuribayashi had lived in America. He studied at Harvard, traveled across the United States and understood American industrial might better than perhaps any officer in the Imperial Japanese Army. He once wrote, "The United States is the last country in the world Japan should fight." But duty called, and Kuribayashi answered with a strategy that would shock the Americans. He broke every rule. Traditional Japanese doctrine demanded defending the beaches, meeting the invaders at the water's edge in a glorious charge. Kuribayashi forbade it. He ordered his men inland, into the rocks, into the volcanic caves. He put 25% of his entire garrison to work digging. They carved 11 miles of tunnels through soft volcanic rock using hand tools. Some chambers could hold 300 men. Every position had multiple entrances, multiple exits. Air shafts prevented suffocation from sulfur fumes. Artillery pieces were mounted in caves with steel doors. Machine gun positions were dug into cliff faces with perfect fields of fire. The entire northern part of the island became a fortress of interlocking defenses, where every square yard could be covered by crossfire. Kuribayashi banned banzai charges. "Every man will kill 10 Americans before dying," he told his troops. "Do not die uselessly. Make them pay for every meter with blood." He evacuated all 1,000 civilians from the island. He knew none of his men were coming home. He knew he wasn't coming home either. The Americans had no idea what they were about to face. Intelligence estimates predicted the island would fall in 5 days, maybe a week. Major General Harry Schmidt, commanding the V Amphibious Corps, requested 10 days of naval bombardment to soften the defenses. Rear Admiral William Blandy gave him 3. The Navy argued they didn't have enough ammunition, didn't have enough time. Schmidt's protests were overruled. Holland Howlin' Mad Smith, the legendary Marine general overseeing the operation, would later call this decision a death sentence for thousands of his men. For 3 days, battleships pounded Iwo Jima. They fired 22,000 shells. It looked devastating. Clouds of black smoke and volcanic dust obscured the entire island. But Kuribayashi's men sat safe in their tunnels, waiting. The bombardment barely scratched the hidden defenses. When the shelling stopped, they emerged, checked their weapons, and prepared to greet the Marines. At 8:59 a.m. on February 19th, exactly 1 minute ahead of schedule, the first wave of Marines hit the beaches. The 4th and 5th Marine Divisions hit the beaches in waves. Hundreds of landing craft disgorged thousands of men onto the black sand shores. The beaches had been color-coded: green and red beaches near Mount Suribachi, blue and yellow beaches to the north. The Marines jumped from their landing craft, weapons ready, expecting hell. Nothing happened. No artillery, no machine gun fire. Just an eerie silence broken only by the sound of waves and the rumble of more landing craft approaching. Some Marines looked at each other in confusion. Was the bombardment actually effective? Had the Japanese abandoned the island? Veterans who'd fought on other Pacific islands knew better. This quiet felt wrong. Then the Marines tried to move inland. The volcanic sand wasn't like normal beach sand. It was like trying to run through loose gravel mixed with ash and cinders. Boots sank 6 inches with every step. Men struggled to climb the steep terraces rising from the waterline. Tracked vehicles bogged down. Wheeled vehicles were completely useless. Within minutes, the beaches became congested. Landing craft kept arriving, depositing more men, more equipment, more supplies onto beaches where nothing could move forward. The Marines were exactly where Kuribayashi wanted them, packed together, struggling, vulnerable. He gave the order. Every hidden gun position on Iwo Jima opened fire at once. Artillery shells from Mount Suribachi rained down on the southern beaches. Mortars zeroed in from the high ground to the north. Machine guns firing from caves and bunkers created a crossfire that swept the beaches like invisible scythes. Men who had been standing suddenly weren't. The volcanic sand, black as coal, turned red in patches. Wounded Marines couldn't dig foxholes in the unstable surface. The steep sand terraces that had been obstacles now became desperate cover as men pressed themselves against the slopes, trying to disappear. Landing craft continued to arrive because they were already committed, their schedules locked in hours before. They unloaded directly into the kill zone. Amtraks, the tracked amphibious tractors, tried to push forward with supplies but got stuck or were blown apart by artillery. The beaches became a nightmare of burning vehicles, scattered equipment, and Marines pinned down by fire they couldn't see to return. Corporal Tony Stein of the 5th Marine Division charged forward with a machine gun he'd personally modified from a wrecked airplane. He called it his Stinger. Stein made 8 trips back and forth across open ground under fire, carrying wounded Marines to safety, going back each time for more ammunition. He killed at least 20 Japanese soldiers that day. He'd received the Medal of Honor. He'd be dead in 10 days. Despite the carnage, the Marines pushed forward. They had no choice. Stay on the beaches and die, or advance inland and fight. Small units found gaps in the defensive fire and moved. They used flamethrowers to burn out bunkers. They threw grenades into cave mouths. They learned quickly that Japanese positions often had multiple entrances, so clearing one cave entrance didn't eliminate the threat. The defenders would retreat through the tunnels and pop up somewhere else. By late afternoon, elements of the 5th Marine Division had fought their way across the island's narrow southern end, cutting off Mount Suribachi from the rest of Iwo Jima. The 28th Marine Regiment, 2,800 men, was given the mission to take the volcano. To the north, other Marine units struggled to advance against the elaborate defenses Kuribayashi had prepared in the rocky highlands. As night fell on D-Day, the Marines had a toehold on Iwo Jima. They'd landed nearly 30,000 men despite the chaos. They'd crossed the island at its narrowest point, but they'd paid in blood. The day's casualties were staggering: over 550 Marines killed, another 1,800 wounded. And they'd barely advanced 700 yards inland. The Marines dug in as best they could in the loose volcanic sand and prepared for the traditional Japanese counterattack. It never came. Kuribayashi had forbidden it. No wasteful banzai charges. Every man would stay in position, hidden, waiting to kill from concealment. The Americans were about to discover that taking this island wouldn't be measured in days, it would be measured in lives. For every 800 feet of ground gained, one Marine would die. The mathematics of Iwo Jima had begun. For 4 days, the 28th Marine Regiment fought for Mount Suribachi. The volcano was honeycombed with tunnels, some descending 7 levels deep. Over 1,000 cave entrances and pillboxes dotted its slopes. Japanese defenders had perfect fields of fire. Every approach was covered. Every rock concealed an enemy position. The Marines advanced yard by yard, using flamethrowers to burn defenders out of caves, using demolitions to seal tunnel entrances, using their own bodies to draw fire so others could advance. On February 23rd, a patrol from Easy Company's 2nd Battalion reached the summit. They carried an American flag. At 10:20 a.m., they raised it on a piece of Japanese pipe. Across the island, Marines looked up and saw the stars and stripes flying over Suribachi. Ships offshore sounded their horns. Men cheered. It was a moment of pure emotion in the middle of hell. A few hours later, a larger flag was brought up to replace the smaller one. As 6 Marines struggled to raise the heavy pole in the wind, Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal snapped a picture. He didn't think much of it at the time. That photograph would become the most reproduced image in history, the inspiration for the Marine Corps War Memorial, a symbol of American resolve, frozen in a single frame. 3 of the 6 men in that photograph would be dead within days. But taking Suribachi was just the beginning. The real nightmare waited in the north. The northern 2/3 of Iwo Jima was a landscape of broken ridges, twisting gorges and volcanic rock formations that provided perfect defensive positions. Kuribayashi had concentrated his best troops here in a fortress of interconnected caves and bunkers. The Marines gave the worst areas names that described the horror: the Meat Grinder, Bloody Gorge, Death Valley, Turkey Knob. The Meat Grinder was a complex of Japanese strongpoints on the island's eastern side. Nearly 850 Marines died trying to take it. The fighting was so close that grenades became the primary weapon. Americans threw grenades into caves. Japanese threw them back. Sometimes the same grenade went back and forth 3 times before exploding. Flamethrower operators had a 92% casualty rate. They were priority targets. The moment a Japanese soldier saw the tanks on a man's back, every gun turned on him. Marines advanced by feet per day, sometimes by feet per hour. They'd clear a position, move forward, and take fire from behind because the Japanese had used tunnels to reoccupy what had just been captured. There was no front line. There was no safe area. Enemy fire could come from any direction at any time. Navy corpsmen, the medics attached to Marine units, ran into open ground again and again to pull wounded men to safety. 827 corpsmen were casualties on Iwo Jima. 4 received the Medal of Honor. By early March, the Marines had pushed the Japanese into the island's northern end, but the defenders weren't breaking. They fought from prepared positions, making the Americans pay for every cave, every tunnel, every yard of volcanic rock. Rain turned the volcanic ash into black mud. Men were covered in it. You couldn't tell Marines from Japanese by their uniforms anymore, only by their helmets. Flame tanks became the weapon of choice. Sherman tanks modified with flamethrowers could pump napalm into cave mouths, creating infernos that sucked the oxygen out of tunnel systems. The Marines became dependent on them. Without flame tanks, entire attacks would halt. At the height of the battle, the 5th Marine Division's flame tanks were burning through 10,000 gallons of napalm per day. 19-year-old Private First Class Jacqueline Lucas threw himself on 2 grenades to save 3 fellow Marines. 1 grenade didn't explode. The other tore through his body. He survived and received the Medal of Honor at age 17, the youngest Marine to ever receive it in World War II. By March 16th, the island was declared secure. But it wasn't over. Kuribayashi was still alive, still fighting, still commanding his remaining troops from somewhere in the northern caves. The killing continued. On the night of March 25th, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi gathered his last 400 men. For 36 days they'd killed 7,000 Americans and wounded 20,000 more. They'd turned 5 days into 5 weeks. But now, out of ammunition, out of food, out of water, out of time, Kuribayashi radioed his final message to Tokyo. "The strength under my command is now about 400. Tanks are attacking us. The enemy suggested we surrender through a loudspeaker, but our officers and men just laughed and paid no attention." In the early hours of March 26th, Kuribayashi led his remaining troops in a final attack on an American encampment. They fought with rifles, with pistols, with swords, with their bare hands. Marine sentries woke to chaos. The fighting was brutal, close, desperate. When dawn broke, Kuribayashi was dead, though his body was never found. Of the 22,000 Japanese soldiers who defended Iwo Jima, only 216 were captured. The rest fought to the death, just as Kuribayashi had ordered. The Americans officially declared the island secure on March 26, 1945, 36 days, 8 square miles. The cost was beyond comprehension. 6,121 United States Marines and sailors killed in action, 19,217 wounded. Total American casualties, 26,038. Nearly 1 in 3 Marines who landed on Iwo Jima was killed or wounded. In some infantry companies, the casualty rate reached 75%. It was the only Pacific battle where American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties. It was the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history, surpassing the total Marine deaths from all of World War I. 27 Medals of Honor were awarded for actions on Iwo Jima, 14 of them posthumously. No other battle in American history produced more. Admiral Chester Nimitz said of the Marines on Iwo Jima, "Uncommon valor was a common virtue." But was it worth it? The question haunted commanders then and historians now. Admiral William Pratt called the invasion unnecessary. Critics pointed out that Japan's early warning radar on nearby Rota Island was never knocked out, so the early warning problem wasn't solved. The island could have been bypassed, isolated, starved into irrelevance. Then the B-29 started landing. On March 4th, before the battle was even over, a damaged B-29 called Dynamite made an emergency landing on Iwo Jima's Motoyama Airfield No. 1. It was the first of many. By the end of the war, 2,400 B-29 Super Fortress bombers would make emergency landings on Iwo Jima. Most carried crews of 11 men. That's over 24,000 American airmen who would have ditched in the Pacific, who would have drowned or been captured or simply disappeared. Instead, they landed on an island paid for in Marine blood. P-51 Mustang fighters based on Iwo Jima began escorting B-29s all the way to Japan and back, drastically reducing bomber losses. The island became exactly what planners hoped: an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific, a lifeline for the strategic bombing campaign that helped force Japan's surrender. Today, Iwo Jima is called Iwoto. The island was returned to Japan in 1968. Few people live there. The sulfur still steams from vents in the volcanic rock. The black sand beaches remain. Somewhere beneath the island, in sealed tunnels and collapsed caves, Kuribayashi and thousands of his men still lie. The American flag no longer flies over Mount Suribachi, but it flies over the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington, Virginia, where the bronze figures of 6 Marines strain eternally to raise it, frozen in Rosenthal's photograph. Admiral Nimitz was right. On Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. 7,000 Marines proved it with their lives. 20,000 more proved it with their blood. They bought 8 square miles of volcanic hell so that 24,000 airmen could come home. They fought for 36 days so that B-29s could reach Japan and end the war. They died so others could live. That's the cost of victory. That's the price of Iwo Jima. That's the legacy that endures.